The hospital room's fluorescent lights buzzed with a persistence that matched the IV drip feeding poison into Sarah's veins, poison that was supposed to save her life. She had learned to count the drops when the nausea became unbearable, when the metallic taste in her mouth made even water seem like battery acid. Drip, pause, drip, pause, each one a small victory against the rebellion happening inside her body. Her phone vibrated on the bedside table, the screen lighting up with a text from her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. "Daddy says you don't love us anymore. Is that true, Mommy?" The words hit harder than any chemotherapy session. Sarah's hands shook as she held the phone, the medical bracelet on her wrist catching the harsh light. The plastic band read, "Sarah Chen, Stage 3 breast cancer, emergency contact David Chen, husband." But David wasn't her emergency contact anymore. He hadn't been since the divorce papers were finalized 3 months ago, right in the middle of her treatment schedule. Her brother Marcus had been staying at David's house, helping with the kids while Sarah underwent treatment. Marcus, who had always been the golden child, the successful lawyer with the perfect wife and the suburban mansion. Marcus, who had volunteered to help when Sarah's world fell apart, who had held her hand during her first oncology appointment when David couldn't take time off work. The irony wasn't lost on her that the person she'd trusted most had become the knife in her back. Dr. Patel knocked softly before entering, her kind eyes immediately taking in Sarah's distressed expression. "How are we feeling today, Sarah? Your white cell count looks better than last week." "My brother told my children I never wanted them," Sarah said without preamble, her voice hoarse from the medications, "while I'm here fighting for my life so I can be here for them." Dr. Patel set down her tablet and pulled the visitor's chair closer to the bed. She had been treating cancer patients for 15 years and had learned that sometimes the emotional wounds ran deeper than the physical ones. "Tell me what happened." Sarah's fingers found the small silver locket around her neck, a Mother's Day gift from Emma and her 6-year-old son Jake 3 years ago. Inside were their school photos, slightly faded now from her constant touching. "Marcus was supposed to be helping David with the kids while I'm in treatment. Instead, he's been filling their heads with lies. Emma just texted me asking if I don't love them anymore." The afternoon sun streamed through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Outside, life continued its normal rhythm. People walking to their cars, mothers picking up children from school, families intact and oblivious to the war being waged in room 314. "Have you spoken to your brother about this?" Dr. Patel asked gently. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus doesn't return my calls anymore. Apparently, I'm too toxic for him to deal with right now. That's rich, considering I'm literally being poisoned to stay alive." The chemotherapy bag hanging above her bed was nearly empty, the clear liquid that had taken her hair, her appetite, and most days her hope, almost finished with today's assault on her system. Sarah had named it liquid courage in her head because it took courage to let something destroy you in order to save you. Nurse Patricia wheeled in the late afternoon snack cart, her scrubs decorated with tiny rainbows, a small act of defiance against the institutional gray of the oncology ward. "How's our fighter today?" she asked with genuine warmth. Patricia had been working this floor for 20 years and could read a patient's mood from the doorway. "Fighting more battles than I signed up for," Sarah replied, managing a weak smile. Patricia glanced at Dr. Patel, who gave a subtle nod. They had developed their own language over the years, these warriors against cancer who understood that healing required more than medicine. "Your kids called the nurse's station earlier," Patricia said, adjusting Sarah's blanket. "They wanted to know if they could send you a drawing through the fax machine. Had to explain that we don't really receive faxed artwork, but they could mail it." She paused, her expression softening. "They sound like they miss you terribly." Sarah's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with her medication. "My brother has been telling them that I chose cancer treatment over them, that I'm in the hospital because I don't want to be home with them." The absurdity of it hung in the air like smoke. How do you explain to children that their mother didn't choose to get sick, that every needle, every nauseous morning, every lost eyelash was a choice to fight for more time with them? Dr. Patel made notes on her tablet, her expression thoughtful. Sarah, have you considered that your brother might be struggling too? Sometimes when people feel helpless, they lash out or try to control the narrative. He's not helpless, Sarah said, anger giving her voice strength for the first time all day. He's a criminal defense attorney. He knows the power of words, knows how to manipulate a story, and he's using that skill on my children. Through the window, Sarah could see the children's hospital across the parking lot, its walls painted with bright murals of cartoon characters and rainbow trees. She thought about Emma and Jake, probably getting home from school right now, throwing their backpacks by the door, asking David why Mommy wasn't there to help with homework again. The IV machine beeped, signaling the end of today's treatment. Patricia moved efficiently to disconnect the line, her movements gentle but practiced. "All done for today, honey. How are you getting home?" Sarah's friend Melissa was supposed to pick her up, but she'd had to cancel last minute when her own daughter got sick at school. "I'll figure it out," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure how. David certainly wouldn't come, and Marcus was apparently too busy poisoning her children's minds to help with transportation. "I can drive you," Dr. Patel offered. "I'm heading out anyway, and you're on my way." The kindness of practical strangers had become Sarah's lifeline. Patricia bringing her favorite tea without being asked, Dr. Patel staying late to answer questions that kept her awake at night, the volunteer who read stories aloud in the children's waiting area when Emma and Jake had visited last month before David decided the hospital was too depressing for them to see their mother. As they waited for Sarah's discharge paperwork, she scrolled through her phone, looking at photos from before the diagnosis, before the divorce, before Marcus revealed his true colors. There was a picture from Emma's 7th birthday party, all of them crowded around the kitchen table, chocolate cake smeared on Jake's cheek, Sarah's hair long and shiny, Marcus with his arm around her shoulders, grinning at the camera. That Marcus seemed like a different person now. The man who had driven 4 hours to be with her when she got the diagnosis, who had researched treatment options and taken notes during her first oncology appointment, who had promised, with tears in his eyes, that he would make sure her children always knew how much their mother loved them. "People show you who they really are during a crisis," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Dr. Patel. "Sometimes," Dr. Patel replied, signing the discharge papers, "but sometimes crisis brings out fear, and fear makes people do things they never thought they would do." As they walked toward the parking garage, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Jake. The question revealed the sophisticated cruelty of Marcus's manipulation. He wasn't just telling the children that their mother didn't want them. He was telling them that her illness was somehow their fault, that her cancer was a symptom of regret rather than a cellular rebellion that had nothing to do with love or want or family planning. Sarah stopped walking, leaning against the concrete wall of the parking garage. The smell of exhaust and antiseptic hand sanitizer mixed in the air, creating the unique perfume of medical limbo, the space between sickness and health, between hospital and home, between the family she'd built and the one that was being systematically dismantled in her absence. "I need to see my children," she said to Dr. Patel. "Tonight, before Marcus can do any more damage." But even as she said it, Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. The custody arrangement, her weakened immune system, David's protective stance, and now Marcus's psychological warfare had created a maze with no clear path to her own children. The late afternoon light filtering through the parking garage created long shadows between the cars, and Sarah realized that she was living in one of those shadows now, present but displaced, loving but separated, fighting but losing ground in ways that had nothing to do with cancer cells and everything to do with the cruelty of people who were supposed to love her. Dr. Patel's car was a practical sedan filled with the comfortable clutter of a working mother, coffee cups in the holders, a child's forgotten sweater in the back seat, medical journals stacked on the passenger floor. It was the car of someone who moved between worlds, professional and personal, clinical and caring. As they drove through the familiar streets of Sarah's neighborhood, past the elementary school where Emma and Jake spent their days, past the park where they'd learned to ride bikes, past the grocery store where they fought over cereal choices just 6 months ago, Sarah felt like a ghost haunting her own life. The question that had been building in her chest finally found voice. How do you fight for your children when the very act of fighting for your life is being used as evidence that you don't love them? Dr. Patel was quiet for several blocks before responding. The same way you fight cancer, she finally said. One day at a time, with whatever strength you have, trusting that love is stronger than lies. But as they pulled into Sarah's empty driveway, the house dark and quiet in the gathering dusk, Sarah wondered if love was enough when it was being systematically redefined by someone who knew exactly how to weaponize a child's need for understanding. She stood in her doorway, keys in hand, facing the silence of a home that had once been filled with laughter and arguments and the beautiful chaos of family life. Somewhere across town, her children were probably having dinner, maybe asking why mommy wasn't there. Maybe believing a little more each day that they were the reason she was gone. The war for her life was being fought on 2 fronts now, and Sarah wasn't sure which battle was more crucial to win. Sarah's morning routine had become a careful choreography of survival. She woke up at 6 a.m., not because she felt rested, but because the anti-nausea medication worked best on an empty stomach, and the empty stomach worked best when she hadn't been lying down for more than 8 hours. The hardwood floors of her bedroom felt cold against her feet, a sharp reminder that she was still alive, still feeling, still here. The bathroom mirror had become both enemy and ally. She had removed it 3 weeks ago when her hair started falling out in clumps, but then put it back because avoiding her reflection felt like giving up. Now she stood before it each morning, cataloging the changes. The sharp angles of her cheekbones, more prominent now that she'd lost 20 pounds. The pale skin that looked translucent in the morning light. The careful way she touched her scalp, checking for new tender spots where the chemotherapy was winning its daily battles.
Her morning pills lined up on the kitchen counter like a rainbow of medical intervention. White for nausea, blue for immunity, pink for bone strength, yellow for mood stability. The pharmacist had suggested a pill organizer, one of those plastic containers divided by days of the week, but Sarah refused. She needed to see them individually, to make the conscious choice each morning to take them, to fight, to continue. The kitchen was too quiet. Before the diagnosis, before the divorce, before Marcus's betrayal, mornings had been a symphony of family chaos. Emma arguing about which cereal was healthiest while eating the one with the most sugar, Jake singing songs he'd learned in kindergarten while trying to tie shoes he hadn't quite mastered, David rushing around looking for his keys, his badge, his coffee mug with the chip in the handle that he refused to replace because Emma had given it to him for Father's Day. Now the silence pressed against her eardrums like water. She made coffee for one, ate toast that tasted like cardboard, and checked her phone for messages that rarely came. The few friends who had stayed in touch after the divorce had gradually faded when the cancer diagnosis made her social calendar unpredictable. Plans canceled for treatment, dinners missed because of fatigue, phone calls ignored when the depression hit hard enough to make conversation feel impossible. Dr. Patel had warned her about this, the way serious illness could thin your circle, not out of malice, but out of discomfort. People didn't know what to say, how to help, whether their problems were too small to mention to someone fighting for their life. So they said nothing, and the silence grew thicker. Sarah had learned to fill the quiet with routine. After breakfast, she would walk through the house, straightening pillows that didn't need straightening, washing dishes that were already clean, watering plants that Emma had helped her choose at the garden center last spring. The plants were thriving, ironically. The snake plant in the living room had grown 3 new shoots. The pothos in the kitchen window had trailed so far it nearly touched the floor. Life persisting, growing, adapting, even when the caretaker was failing.
She kept a journal now, something she'd never done before the diagnosis. Dr. Patel had suggested it as a way to track symptoms and side effects, but it had become something more, a place to write letters to her children that she couldn't send, a space to record the things she wanted them to remember about her, just in case. Dear Emma and Jake, she wrote that morning, her handwriting shakier than it used to be. Today marks 127 days since my diagnosis. I want you to know that every single one of those days, I have thought about you first when I wake up and last before I sleep. Uncle Marcus is telling you things that aren't true, and I don't know how to fight his words when I can barely fight this disease. But I need you to know that you were not a mistake. You were not unwanted. You were the best surprise of my entire life. She paused, pen hovering over the paper. How do you explain to children that their existence had saved you long before cancer threatened to take you away? That becoming their mother had given her a purpose so profound that it rewrote her understanding of love itself? The house phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed David's number, and for a moment, hope fluttered in her chest. Maybe he was calling to arrange a visit with the kids. Maybe Emma and Jake had asked to talk to her. Maybe... David, Sarah, we need to talk. David's voice was stiff, formal, the way he spoke to opposing counsel in court. Of course, are Emma and Jake okay? They're fine. They're at school. But Marcus showed me the text messages you've been sending them. Sarah's blood went cold. What text messages? Don't play dumb. The ones where you're trying to turn them against Marcus, where you're telling them he's lying. David, I haven't sent any messages trying to turn them against anyone. I've been trying to reassure them that I love them because apparently Marcus has been telling them I don't. That's not what Marcus says. He says you're manipulating the situation, trying to make him the bad guy because you can't handle that the kids are adjusting to you not being around.
The accusation hit like a physical blow. Sarah sank into her kitchen chair, the journal still open in front of her, her morning pills scattered across the table like evidence of her daily battle to stay alive. David, I have cancer. I'm not choosing to be away from them. I'm fighting to live for them. Look, Sarah, I know this is hard, but you have to understand that your situation is confusing for them. Marcus is just trying to help them process why their lives have changed so much. My situation? Sarah's voice rose, anger giving her strength. My situation is that I have stage 3 breast cancer. My situation is that I'm undergoing chemotherapy that makes me sick for days at a time. My situation is not a choice I made to abandon our children. There was a long pause on David's end of the line. She could hear morning sounds in the background, the coffee maker finishing its cycle, the television news program they used to watch together, the familiar rhythm of the life they'd built that was continuing without her. I think it would be better if you didn't contact the kids directly for a while, just until you're better. Marcus thinks the constant back and forth is making things harder for them. Marcus thinks? Since when does Marcus make decisions about my children? Since he's here helping every day and you're not. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone in her hand, the silence of the house rushing back to fill the space where her family used to be. She looked at her journal entry, at the words she'd written to children who might never read them, at the morning pills that represented her daily commitment to survival, and felt something crack inside her chest that had nothing to do with cancer. She called back. The phone went straight to voicemail. She tried David's cell phone. Voicemail. She tried Marcus's number, though she hadn't spoken to him in 2 weeks. The phone rang once, twice, then, Sarah, you need to stop calling. You're only making this harder on everyone. Marcus, please, I just need to understand what's happening. David says you told him I've been sending manipulative text messages to the kids, but I haven't. You're in denial, Sarah. You've always been in denial about how your choices affect other people. What choices? Getting cancer wasn't a choice. Fighting to live isn't a choice. Loving my children isn't a choice.
Getting divorced was a choice. Putting yourself first was a choice. And now you're paying the consequences. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Sarah felt her legs give out and she sank back into her kitchen chair. Her free hand pressed against her chest where her heart was racing. Are you really telling me that I deserve cancer because I got divorced? I'm telling you that actions have consequences, and maybe if you tried harder to keep your family together, you wouldn't be alone right now. The line went dead again. Sarah sat in her kitchen, surrounded by the debris of her morning routine, staring at the journal where she'd been writing love letters to her children. The plants continued their quiet growth in the window. The coffee grew cold in her mug. The pills waited patiently for her to remember that staying alive required daily maintenance. She thought about the woman she had been before the diagnosis. The mother who had volunteered in Emma's classroom, who had coached Jake's t-ball team, who had worked full-time as a graphic designer while managing dance classes and doctor appointments and birthday parties, and the thousand small crises that make up family life. That woman had been flawed, certainly. She'd been overwhelmed sometimes, impatient occasionally, tired most days. But she had loved her children with a fierce completeness that redefined her understanding of her own capacity for devotion.
The woman Marcus was describing, selfish, manipulative, abandoning, was a stranger. But it was the woman her children were learning to believe in. And that realization was more terrifying than any oncology appointment. Sarah opened her laptop and began typing. If she couldn't speak to her children, she could document the truth. She could create a record of this time, of the real story, of the love that was being systematically erased from their understanding of who she was. She wrote about the day she was diagnosed, how her first thought was not of her own mortality, but of who would drive Emma to dance class and help Jake with his reading homework. She wrote about the conversations with David about treatment schedules, how they'd tried to coordinate her chemotherapy appointments around school events and family dinners, how they'd agreed that consistency would be better for the children than watching her be sick. She wrote about Marcus arriving with groceries and good intentions, about the way he'd held her hand during her second oncology appointment when the doctor explained the aggressive nature of her particular cancer, about the promise he'd made to help maintain normalcy for Emma and Jake, to make sure they understood that Mommy was fighting to come home, not choosing to stay away. She wrote until her fingers ached, until the morning turned to afternoon, until she had created a record that felt true and complete and heartbreaking in its documentation of love being twisted into abandonment. The doorbell rang just after noon. Through the front window, Sarah could see a delivery truck, a driver holding a large box. She signed for the package, noting the return address, Emma's elementary school. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, crayon masterpieces featuring stick figure families, houses with smoking chimneys, rainbow skies, and flowers that looked like colorful explosions. At the bottom of each drawing, in Emma's careful handwriting, "For Mommy, to make you feel better." There was a note from Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. "The children have been asking about you. Emma mentioned that you were in the hospital, so our class made get well cards. I hope you're feeling better soon." Sarah spread the drawings across her kitchen table, her journal pushed aside to make room for this unexpected evidence that she had not been forgotten, not been erased, not been replaced by Marcus's narrative. Jake's drawing showed two figures holding hands under a yellow sun, with the words "Me and Mommy" written in his kindergarten scrawl. Emma's drawing was more complex, a hospital building with windows, a stick figure in one of the windows waving, and two smaller stick figures on the ground waving back. At the bottom, "Mommy is getting strong medicine so she can come home and play with us." The drawings were truth. They were love made visible in crayon and construction paper. They were proof that whatever Marcus was telling her children, whatever David was allowing him to say,
Some part of Emma and Jake still remembered who their mother really was. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia from the oncology ward. Dr. Patel asked me to check on you. How are you feeling today?" The unexpected kindness of the message made her eyes fill with tears. Here was someone who saw her every week in her most vulnerable state, who knew the reality of her struggle, who understood that fighting cancer was not a choice, but a daily act of courage. "I'm struggling," Sarah typed back, "not with the treatment, but with my family. My brother is telling my children lies about me, and I don't know how to fight back when I can barely fight this disease." The response came quickly. "Would you like to talk? I get off my shift at 3. I could come by, or we could meet somewhere." The offer felt like a lifeline thrown into dark water. Sarah had been drowning in isolation, in the silence of her house, in the toxic narrative being constructed around her absence from her children's daily lives. The idea of talking to someone who understood the reality of her situation, who had seen her at her weakest, and still offered kindness, felt like the first real breath she'd taken in weeks. "Could you come here?" she typed. "I don't think I have the energy to go out, but I have coffee and I really need someone to talk to. I'll be there at 3:30. And Sarah, those kids are lucky to have you fighting so hard to come home to them." Sarah looked at the children's drawings scattered across her table, at her journal full of love letters she couldn't send, at the morning pills that represented her daily commitment to survival. Maybe Patricia was right. Maybe the fight itself was proof of love, regardless of how others chose to interpret it. But as she prepared for Patricia's visit, cleaning the house that had become too quiet, making coffee for 2 instead of 1, Sarah couldn't shake the fear that love might not be enough if it was being systematically redefined as abandonment in the minds of the 2 people who mattered most. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked toward 3:30, and Sarah realized she was preparing to fight a battle she'd never trained for. Not against cancer, but against the weaponized interpretation of her own maternal love. Patricia arrived at 3:30 exactly, carrying an insulated bag and wearing civilian clothes that made her look younger, less clinical, more like the friend Sarah desperately needed. Her scrubs had been replaced by jeans and a soft blue sweater, but her eyes held the same compassionate competence that made her so effective in the oncology ward. "I brought soup," Patricia said, holding up the bag. "My grandmother's recipe. It's what she made for me when I was going through chemo 15 years ago." The casual mention of her own cancer history hit Sarah like a revelation. Here was someone who understood not just as a caregiver, but as a survivor, someone who had walked this path and come out the other side. They sat at Sarah's kitchen table, the children's drawings still spread across the surface like colorful evidence of interrupted love. Patricia picked up Jake's drawing of him and his mommy, tracing the crayon lines with her finger. "Tell me about your brother," Patricia said, getting straight to the heart of the matter with the directness that made her so good at her job. Sarah found herself telling the whole story. The divorce that had already strained her relationship with David, the diagnosis that had brought Marcus rushing to her side, the early days when he had been her advocate, her note-taker, her emotional support. The gradual shift as her treatment stretched on, as David's discomfort with her illness became more apparent, as the children's questions about Mommy's absence became harder to answer. At first, Marcus was amazing, Sarah explained, stirring the soup that tasted like comfort and care. He drove 4 hours every week for my appointments. He researched treatment centers, second opinions, clinical trials. He even offered to pay for experimental treatments if insurance didn't cover them. "What changed?" Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she'd seen this story before.
David started relying on him more. With the kids, with decisions about my treatment schedule, with explanations about why I wasn't home. And somewhere along the way, Marcus started, I don't know how to describe it, taking ownership of the narrative. Sarah showed her phone to Patricia, scrolling through text messages from Emma and Jake that had become increasingly heartbreaking over the past month.
Daddy and Uncle Marcus say you're too tired to see us. Uncle Marcus says sick people need to focus on getting better, not on playing. Why did you choose to get sick, Mommy? Do you wish you didn't have kids so you could be healthy? Each message represented a small act of psychological warfare, a careful reshaping of reality that transformed a mother's medical crisis into evidence of maternal inadequacy. Patricia read the messages with the calm expression of someone who had seen the full spectrum of human behavior during times of crisis. "This is emotional abuse," she said matter-of-factly. "What your brother is doing to those children and to you is systematic emotional abuse." Hearing it named so clearly was both validating and terrifying. But he's helping David with the kids. He's taking them to school, helping with homework, cooking dinner. From the outside, he looks like the hero in this situation. "Abusers often do," Patricia said. "They position themselves as rescuers, as the stable presence when everything else is chaotic. It makes their manipulation harder to identify and harder to challenge." The soup grew cold as Sarah found herself describing incidents she'd been trying to rationalize for weeks. The way Marcus had gradually stopped updating her about the children's daily lives, claiming it was too emotional for her to hear about school events she was missing. The way he'd begun screening her phone calls with Emma and Jake, saying they were too upset to talk to her after their conversations. The way he'd started referring to her treatment as Sarah's situation rather than her cancer, as if she'd chosen to be difficult rather than chosen to fight for her life. "Last week," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Emma asked me why I was pretending to be sick to get attention. When I asked where she'd heard that, she said Uncle Marcus told her that some mommies get overwhelmed and make up reasons to stay away from their families." Patricia set down her spoon with more force than necessary. "That's not just emotional abuse, Sarah. That's psychological terrorism. He's teaching your children to distrust their own instincts about your love for them." As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone rang. David's number appeared on the screen, and both women looked at it as if it were a live grenade. "Answer it. I want to hear this." Sarah put the phone on speaker. David's voice filled the kitchen, tight with an anger that had become familiar over the past weeks. "Sarah, Emma came home from school upset today. She said she got cards from your hospital friends telling her that you miss her. You need to stop using other people to get around our agreement about direct contact." "David, I didn't send any cards through." "Mrs. Rodriguez called. She said Emma's class made get well cards and that Emma seemed confused about whether you actually wanted to see them or not. Marcus thinks you're manipulating the school staff to make us look bad." Patricia gestured for Sarah to stay calm, mouthing the word document while pointing to Sarah's journal. "David, Mrs. Rodriguez sent cards that Emma's class made voluntarily. I didn't request them. I didn't even know about them until they arrived." "That's not what Marcus says. He thinks you called the school pretending to be sick to get sympathy."
The pattern that emerged was clear and deliberate. Marcus had gradually positioned himself as the primary source of information about Sarah's condition and motivations. He had reframed her medical needs as personal choices. He had interpreted her physical limitations as emotional rejection. He had transformed her fight for life. The accusation was so absurd, so divorced from reality, that Sarah almost laughed. "David, I have stage 3 breast cancer. I'm not pretending to be sick. You've seen my medical records. You were there when I was diagnosed." Marcus says people with cancer can exaggerate their symptoms for attention. Patricia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor.
She walked to Sarah's kitchen counter, picking up the morning pill lineup that Sarah had left there, the rainbow of medications that kept her body functioning while chemotherapy attacked both the cancer and everything else. "David," Patricia said loudly enough for the phone to pick up her voice, "this is Patricia Williams, Sarah's oncology nurse. I'm looking at 8 different medications that your ex-wife takes every morning just to manage the side effects of the chemotherapy that is literally keeping her alive. Would you like me to read you the list? Would you like me to explain what each one does to her body? Would you like me to describe the blood work we do twice a week to make sure the treatment isn't killing her faster than the cancer would?" There was silence on the other end of the line. "Who is that?" David finally asked. "That's my nurse," Sarah said, finding her voice again. "She's someone who sees me 3 times a week in the oncology ward where I receive treatment for the cancer that is not imaginary, not exaggerated, and not a choice I made to avoid my responsibilities as a mother. Marcus says, I don't care what Marcus says. I care about medical facts. Your ex-wife has aggressive breast cancer. Her prognosis is good if she completes treatment, but the treatment is brutal. She spends every day fighting to stay alive, and part of what keeps her fighting is her love for her children. What your brother is doing to those children is cruel, and what you're allowing him to do is enabling abuse." David hung up. Sarah stared at the silent phone, then looked at Patricia, who had returned to her seat and was calmly eating soup as if she hadn't just declared war on Sarah's behalf. "You didn't have to do that," Sarah said. "Yes, I did, because you can't fight this battle alone, and you shouldn't have to." Patricia pulled out her own phone. "I'm going to give you the number for a family counselor who specializes in medical trauma and parental alienation. Her name is Dr. Martinez, and she's helped other patients navigate exactly this situation. David won't agree to counseling, and I can't force Marcus to participate. You can document what's happening. You can build a case. And if necessary, you can file for a modification of your custody arrangement based on psychological abuse of your children." The idea of adding a custody battle to her list of current fights felt overwhelming. Sarah looked around her kitchen, at the medical supplies on the counter, at the children's drawings on the table, at the journal where she'd been documenting her love for children who were being taught to doubt it. "I don't know if I have the strength for a legal battle while I'm fighting cancer." "Then we'll find you the strength, because those kids need their mother. And right now, they're being systematically programmed to believe their mother doesn't want them." Over the next 2 hours, Patricia helped Sarah create what they called the truth file. They organized the children's drawings alongside printouts of Sarah's text messages, medical records, treatment schedules, and documentation of every conversation with David and Marcus over the past 2 months. She held up Jake's most recent text. "Uncle Marcus says you probably won't get better because you don't want to try hard enough." The cruelty was breathtaking. Marcus had taken a 6-year-old's natural fear about his mother's illness and twisted it into a weapon against both of them. "Why is he doing this?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, organizing the documents into neat piles. Sometimes, when people feel helpless, they try to control whatever they can. Marcus couldn't control your cancer, couldn't control your divorce, couldn't control the disruption to his perfect family image, but he could control the story. He could be the hero who stepped in when his irresponsible sister failed her children. But he knows that's not true. Does he? Or has he convinced himself that his version is true, that you're weak, selfish, that you chose divorce over family stability, that you're using cancer as an excuse to avoid responsibility? Patricia's voice was gentle but unflinching. People rewrite history to cast themselves as heroes, and your brother has had 2 months of uninterrupted access to your children to rewrite yours. The front door opened without warning, and both women looked up in surprise. David stood in the doorway, his key still in his hand, his expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been guilt. "We need to talk," he said, not acknowledging Patricia's presence. "David, you can't just walk into my house anymore. We're divorced." "I still have a key for emergencies, and this is an emergency." He stepped into the kitchen, his eyes taking in the medical supplies on the counter, the children's drawings on the table, the organized documents that Patricia had helped arrange. What is all this? It's the truth, Sarah said, standing up despite the dizziness that still hit her sometimes when she moved too quickly. It's documentation of what's really been happening while I've been fighting cancer. David picked up one of Emma's drawings, the one showing Mommy in the hospital window, waving to her children on the ground below. His expression softened slightly, and for a moment Sarah saw the man she'd married, the father who had once built blanket forts and read bedtime stories and worried about their children's happiness above all else. "Marcus called me," David said, setting the drawing down carefully. "He said your nurse was being aggressive on the phone, making accusations." "I was being truthful," Patricia said calmly. "Sometimes truth sounds aggressive when people are used to lies." David turned to look at Patricia fully for the first time. "You don't know our situation. You don't know what Sarah was like before she got sick." "You're right. I don't know what she was like before, but I know what she's like now. I know that she asks about her children during every treatment. I know that she carries their pictures in her hospital gown pocket. I know that when she was so sick last month that she couldn't keep food down for 3 days, she still asked me to call and check if Emma had gotten over her cold." Marcus says, "Stop." The word came out of Sarah with such force that both David and Patricia looked at her in surprise. "Stop telling me what Marcus says. Marcus is not our children's father. Marcus is not my doctor. Marcus is not an expert on cancer or parenting or marriage. Marcus is my brother who has spent 2 months systematically poisoning our children's understanding of their mother's love, and you've been helping him do it." David's face flushed red. "That's not fair, Sarah. Marcus has been helping with everything. Marcus has been helping himself to the role of perfect parent by making me the villain in my own children's story." Sarah's voice was getting stronger, fueled by months of suppressed anger. "He's taught Emma that I'm pretending to be sick for attention. He's taught Jake that I don't want to see them. He's turned my fight for life into evidence that I'm a bad mother." "You've been absent, Sarah. Whether it's because of cancer or not, you've been absent." "I've been absent because I've been trying not to die." Sarah's voice cracked. "I've been absent because chemotherapy makes me so sick I can't stand up some days. I've been absent because my immune system is so compromised that being around other people could literally kill me. I haven't been absent by choice." David was quiet for a long moment, looking around the kitchen again. His eyes lingered on the pill organizer, on the medical papers scattered across the table, on the evidence of a daily battle that he'd apparently been choosing not to see. "Marcus said you were exaggerating how sick you were," he said quietly. "Marcus said that because Marcus needs me to be the problem so he can be the solution. Look at me, David. Really, look at me." She pulled off the soft knit hat she'd been wearing, revealing her bald scalp, the pale skin marked with tiny bruises from blood draws and IVs. She pushed up her sleeves, showing the port scar on her chest, the track marks on her arms where needles found veins twice a week. "This is what fighting cancer looks like. This is what I look like when I'm trying to stay alive for our children. Does this look like someone who's exaggerating?" David's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in months, he was seeing her, really seeing her, instead of seeing the inconvenient problem that Marcus had convinced she'd become. "I didn't realize," he started, then stopped. "You didn't realize because you didn't want to realize. Because if you admitted how sick Sarah really is, you'd have to admit that your brother has been abusing your children by using their mother's illness against her." The word abuse hung in the air like a challenge. David shook his head, but the denial looked forced. "Marcus wouldn't hurt Emma and Jake. He loves them." "Love and harm aren't mutually exclusive," Patricia said. "Marcus might believe he's protecting them from disappointment, but what he's actually doing is teaching them that their mother's love is conditional, unreliable, and possibly fabricated. That's psychological abuse, even if it's not intentional." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, she glanced at the screen, then felt her knees give out. Patricia caught her arm as she sank back into her chair. "What is it?" David asked, his voice sharp with concern. Sarah held up her phone with a shaking hand. The text was from Emma. "Uncle Marcus says if you really loved us, you would get better faster. Why aren't you trying harder, Mommy?" The 3 adults stared at the message in silence. Even David seemed to understand the cruelty of asking a 6-year-old to believe that her mother's recovery depended on willpower rather than medical science. "He told a 6-year-old that her mother's cancer is a choice," Patricia said, her voice deadly quiet. David sat down heavily in the remaining kitchen chair, his head in his hands.
I thought Marcus said he was helping them understand why you couldn't be home. He said they were asking hard questions and he was trying to give them answers that made sense.
Those aren't answers, David. Those are weapons, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's weaponizing our children's love for me against both of us. The kitchen fell quiet, except for the sound of the refrigerator humming and the clock ticking on the wall. Outside, the afternoon was turning toward evening, the light beginning to slant lower through the windows. Somewhere across town, Emma and Jake were probably finishing their homework, maybe asking when Mommy would be well enough to help them again, maybe believing a little more each day that the answer was never. I need to see them, Sarah said suddenly. Tonight, before Marcus can do any more damage. Sarah, your immune system, David started. I'll wear a mask. I'll sit 6 feet away. I'll do whatever it takes to be safe, but I need to look my children in the eyes and tell them the truth about why I've been gone. David was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table in the nervous pattern Sarah remembered from their marriage, the rhythm he fell into when he was wrestling with a decision he didn't want to make. Marcus won't like it, he finally said. I don't care what Marcus likes. I care about what Emma and Jake need, and what they need is to understand that their mother's absence is not abandonment. Patricia stood up, beginning to clear the soup bowls and organize the documents back into neat piles. David, can I ask you something? If your children were older, if they were teenagers or adults, and someone was systematically lying to them about their mother's motivations during a life-threatening illness, would you consider that acceptable? No, of course not. Then why is it acceptable now? Because they're too young to understand cancer? Because they're too young to recognize manipulation? That doesn't make the damage less real. It makes it worse. David looked at Sarah, really looked at her, for the first time since he'd arrived. She saw him taking in the weight loss, the pale skin, the careful way she moved to avoid jarring the port in her chest. She saw the moment when the woman Marcus had been describing to him, selfish, manipulative, using illness for attention, disappeared and the woman he'd actually married came back into focus. God, Sarah, you look so thin. I've lost 23 pounds since treatment started. The anti-nausea medications help, but food still tastes like metal most days. I didn't know. Marcus said you were feeling better, that the treatment was going well. The treatment is going well. My tumor markers are dropping and Dr. Patel is optimistic about my prognosis. But going well doesn't mean easy. It doesn't mean I'm not sick. It doesn't mean I chose this. David's phone rang, and all three of them tensed when Marcus's name appeared on the screen. David looked at Sarah, then at Patricia, then at the phone. Don't answer it, please. Not yet. Not until after I've seen Emma and Jake. David let the call go to voicemail. Patricia finished organizing the documents, then wrote her phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to David. If you need someone to explain the medical reality of Sarah's situation to your brother, or to a counselor, or to a judge, if it comes to that, call me. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I know the difference between someone who's fighting for their life and someone who's seeking attention. It won't come to a judge, David said quickly. It will, if Marcus doesn't stop. Because what he's doing to those children is documentable psychological abuse, and Sarah has every right to protect them from it, even while she's protecting herself from cancer.
As Patricia prepared to leave, Sarah walked her to the door, moving slowly but with more strength than she'd felt in weeks. "Thank you," Sarah said, "for believing me, for seeing what's really happening." "Thank you for fighting," Patricia replied, "for your life and for your kids. They're going to need their mother, and you're making sure she'll be here for them." After Patricia left, Sarah and David sat in the kitchen as the light outside began to fade. For the first time in months, they weren't talking through lawyers or through Marcus's interpretations. They were just two people who had once loved each other enough to create two beautiful children, trying to figure out how to protect those children from the collateral damage of adult cruelty. "I want to see them tonight," Sarah said again. "Okay, but we need to talk to Marcus first. I need to understand what he's been telling them and why." Sarah nodded, though the thought of confronting Marcus while she was still weak from treatment felt like preparing for battle with one arm tied behind her back.
But Emma's text message was still glowing on her phone, the evidence that her 6-year-old daughter had been taught to blame her mother for not recovering fast enough, and that was motivation enough to fight any battle necessary. "David," Sarah said as they prepared to leave, "when we see them tonight, I need you to support the truth, not Marcus's version, not a diluted version to keep peace, the truth, that I have cancer, that I'm fighting it, that I love them, and that I will be home as soon as it's safe." "I will," David said, and for the first time in months, Sarah believed him. But as they drove toward the house where her children were learning to doubt her love, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battle was still ahead of her. Because Marcus had had 2 months to build his narrative, and she would have 1 evening to tear it down. The war for her children's understanding of her love was about to begin. The house that had once been Sarah's felt like foreign territory as she and David sat in his car outside, both of them gathering courage for the confrontation that would determine her children's understanding of their mother's love. Through the living room window, Sarah could see the warm glow of familiar lamps, the silhouettes of Emma and Jake moving around inside, the shadow of Marcus's figure gesturing as if he were telling a story. "He's already talking to them," Sarah observed, her voice tight with anxiety. "We don't know that," David said, but his grip on the steering wheel suggested otherwise. Sarah checked her phone one more time, reviewing the documentation Patricia had helped her organize. Text messages, medical records, treatment schedules, evidence that her absence was medical necessity, not maternal choice. She had also brought something else. A folder containing letters she'd written to Emma and Jake during her worst treatment days, expressions of love that she'd never been able to send because Marcus had convinced David that emotional communication would be too confusing for the children. "Are you ready?" David asked. Sarah looked at the house where her children were learning to believe lies about her love. "I've been ready since the day I was diagnosed. Everything I've done since then has been about being ready to come home to them." They walked up the path together, and Sarah noticed details she'd forgotten. The way the porch light flickered, the crack in the sidewalk where Jake had tripped learning to ride his bike, the garden where Emma had planted sunflowers last spring. The flowers were gone now, winter dormant, but Sarah remembered their faces turning toward the sun, reaching for light the way she'd been reaching for health. David used his key, calling out as they entered. "Marcus, kids, we're here." The response was immediate and telling. Emma's voice from the living room. "Daddy, is Mommy really here, or is Uncle Marcus right that she won't come?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her 8-year-old daughter had been taught to doubt whether her mother would keep promises, to expect disappointment, to question the reliability of maternal love. They found Marcus in the living room with Emma and Jake on the couch, homework spread across the coffee table. Marcus looked up with an expression of surprise that seemed carefully practiced. "Sarah, I didn't know you were coming. Are you feeling well enough to be around the children?" The question was designed to plant doubt immediately, to suggest that her presence might be dangerous, that her judgment about her own health couldn't be trusted. "I'm feeling well enough to see my children," Sarah replied, moving slowly into the room. "Hello, my loves." Emma looked up from her math homework, her expression cautious in a way that broke Sarah's heart. This was not how her daughter used to greet her, with suspicion and uncertainty instead of joy and relief. "Mommy, you look different," Emma said quietly. "I do look different, sweetheart. I lost my hair because of the medicine I'm taking to get better. But I'm still your mommy, and I still love you more than all the stars in the sky." Jake, who had been coloring at the coffee table, looked up with the unfiltered honesty of a 6-year-old. "Uncle Marcus said you're bald because you're sad about not having us. Is that true?" Sarah felt her legs tremble, but she made it to the armchair across from the couch, sitting down carefully. David remained standing, his position between her and Marcus somehow protective. "No, baby, that's not true at all. I'm bald because I'm taking very strong medicine to fight the sickness inside my body. It's called chemotherapy, and it makes me tired and sick sometimes.
but it's helping me get better so I can be with you. Uncle Marcus says some mommies make up being sick when they don't want to take care of their kids. He says that's what happened to his friend's sister. Marcus shifted on the couch, his expression suggesting he was preparing to defend his narrative. Sarah looked at him directly for the first time since entering the room. Marcus, did you really tell my children that I'm making up having cancer? I told them that sometimes adults say they're sicker than they really are to avoid responsibility. I was trying to help them understand why you've been absent from their lives. I haven't been absent by choice, Marcus. I've been fighting for my life so I can be present in their lives. That's your perspective, Sarah. But from where I sit, watching David struggle to manage work and childcare alone while you're in the hospital for what seems like minor symptoms? Minor symptoms? Marcus, I have stage 3 breast cancer. I've undergone 6 months of chemotherapy. I've lost 23 pounds. I've had surgery to place a port in my chest so they can deliver medication that's toxic enough to kill cancer cells. These are not minor symptoms.
Emma looked confused, her 8-year-old mind trying to process conflicting information from adults she trusted. But Uncle Marcus said cancer isn't that serious anymore, that people just use it as an excuse. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. She looked at Marcus, who was avoiding her eyes now, focusing on straightening Jake's coloring pages. Marcus, did you tell my children that cancer isn't serious? I told them that medical technology has advanced, that many people live normal lives with cancer, that it doesn't have to define someone's entire existence. But you also told them that I'm exaggerating my symptoms, that I'm using cancer as an excuse to avoid being their mother. David stepped forward, his voice tight with an anger Sarah hadn't heard from him in months. Marcus, is that what you told them? I told them the truth as I see it. Marcus has always been dramatic about health issues. Remember when she thought she had appendicitis and it was just gas? Remember when she was convinced Emma had meningitis and it was just a fever? She has a pattern of catastrophizing medical situations. This isn't gas or a fever, Marcus. This is cancer. I have actual cancer. Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling to a photo she'd never planned to show her children, a picture of her tumor from the initial MRI. Do you want to see the tumor? Do you want to see the medical proof that I'm not making this up? Mommy, you have a picture of your sickness? Jake asked, his coloring forgotten. I do, baby, because sometimes when people are very sick, doctors take pictures to help them understand how to make the person better. Emma slid off the couch and walked over to Sarah's chair, her expression shifting from suspicion to concern. Can I see? She showed her the MRI image, pointing to the dark mass that had invaded her breast tissue. This is what was making me sick, sweetheart. It's called a tumor, and it was growing inside my body. The doctors have been giving me medicine to make it smaller so they can take it out. It looks scary, Emma said quietly. It was scary, but the doctors are very smart and the medicine is working. The tumor is much smaller now. Jake abandoned his coloring and came to look at the phone as well. Does it hurt? Sometimes it hurts, yes, and the medicine makes me feel sick sometimes. But I take it because I want to get better so I can come home and help you with homework and read you bedtime stories and take you to the park. Marcus stood up abruptly, his composure finally cracking. Sarah, you're confusing them with medical details they don't need to know. They're children. They're my children, Marcus, and they have a right to understand why their mother has been absent from their daily lives. They have a right to know that it's not because I don't love them. But Uncle Marcus said you got divorced because you didn't want to be a family anymore, Emma said, looking between the adults with growing distress. Oh, sweetheart, no. Daddy and I got divorced because we couldn't live together anymore as husband and wife, but that has nothing to do with you and Jake. Getting divorced doesn't mean I stopped wanting to be your mother. But Uncle Marcus said... Emma, David interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. Uncle Marcus was wrong about some things. Mommy didn't choose to get sick, and she didn't choose to be away from you. She's been fighting very hard to get better so she can come home. Marcus turned to David with an expression of betrayal. David, we talked about this. You agreed that Sarah's situation was confusing for the children. I agreed that cancer was confusing for them, David replied. I didn't agree that you should tell them their mother was lying about being sick. I never said she was lying. I said she was exaggerating. To an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, what's the difference? Sarah asked. You taught them to doubt me, Marcus. You taught them to question whether their mother's love is real. Jake, who had been quietly absorbing the adult conversation, suddenly started crying. I don't understand, he said through his tears. Is Mommy really sick or not? Is she coming home or not? Why is everyone saying different things? Sarah opened her arms and Jake ran to her, climbing onto her lap despite David's concerned look about her weakened immune system. She held her son, feeling his solid warmth against her chest, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair. I am really sick, baby boy, she said softly, but I'm getting better, and I am coming home as soon as the doctors say it's safe. I promise you that. Uncle Marcus said you make promises you can't keep, Jake whispered against her shoulder. Sarah looked over Jake's head at Marcus, her anger finally overriding her exhaustion. What kind of man tells a 6-year-old that his mother doesn't keep promises? The kind of man who's watched you disappoint these children over and over again. Do you know how many times they've asked when you're coming home? Do you know how many times David has had to explain why you're not here for school events, bedtime, dinner, normal family life? Do you know why I'm not here for those things, Marcus? Because I'm trying not to die. Because I spend 3 days a week getting chemicals pumped into my body that make me so sick I can't stand up. Because my immune system is so compromised that being in a crowd of people could literally kill me. Emma had returned to the couch, but she was watching her mother with new attention, as if seeing her clearly for the first time in months. Mommy, why didn't you tell us about the medicine making you sick? Because Uncle Marcus told Daddy that it would be too scary for you to know the details. He said it would be better if you just knew that Mommy was resting and getting better. But that's not what he told us, Emma said, looking at Marcus with something approaching accusation. He told us you were being dramatic. He told us sick people who really want to get better don't need to be in the hospital so much. Marcus's face flushed red. I was trying to help them understand why their lives had been turned upside down. I was trying to give them a framework for... You were trying to make me the villain so you could be the hero, Sarah interrupted. You were trying to replace me in their affections by teaching them that I had abandoned them. That's not true. Isn't it? Marcus, in the past 2 months, you've told my children that I'm exaggerating my illness, that I chose to get divorced instead of staying with their father, that I make promises I don't keep, that I'm using cancer as an excuse to avoid responsibility, and that if I really loved them, I would get better faster. How is that not trying to replace me? David had been standing quietly throughout the exchange, but now he moved to sit on the coffee table facing both children. Emma, Jake, I need to tell you something important. Uncle Marcus was wrong. He was trying to help, but he gave you information that wasn't true. Mommy has been very, very sick, and all the time she's been in the hospital has been so she can fight the sickness and come home to us.
But Uncle Marcus said, Emma started, Uncle Marcus doesn't know about cancer the way Mommy's doctors do, David said firmly. And Uncle Marcus forgot that the most important thing is for you to know that Mommy loves you, not for you to understand why our family has been different lately. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out the folder of letters she'd written during her worst treatment days. I brought something for you both. These are letters I wrote to you when I was too sick to visit, when I was missing you so much it hurt worse than the medicine. Emma took the folder carefully, opening it to reveal pages of Sarah's handwriting, some shaky from medication side effects, all filled with expressions of love and longing. Dear Emma, Emma read aloud,
Today, I was so sick from the treatment that I couldn't eat anything, but I kept thinking about the pancakes we used to make on Saturday mornings. I can't wait to make pancakes with you again when I'm better. I love you more than all the books and all the libraries. Jake climbed down from Sarah's lap to look at his own letter. Dear Jake, I know you're learning to read, so I'm writing this in big letters. I miss reading bedtime stories with you. I miss hearing about your day at school. The doctors say I'm getting stronger every day, which means I'm one day closer to coming home to you. The children read through letter after letter, each one a testament to love, to hope, to the daily struggle of a mother fighting to return to her children. Marcus sat silently on the couch, his narrative crumbling as evidence of Sarah's true feelings filled the room. Why didn't we get these before? Emma asked. Sarah looked at David, who looked at Marcus. The silence stretched until Marcus finally spoke. I thought they would be too emotional, too confusing. You mean they would contradict the story you were telling about me, Sarah said. They would prove that I've been thinking about Emma and Jake every single day, missing them every single moment, fighting to come home to them with every ounce of strength I have. Marcus stood up abruptly, his composure finally shattered. Fine, Sarah. You win. You're the perfect mother who's been victimized by cancer and by me and by everyone who tried to help your children cope with your absence. Is that what you want to hear? I want to hear the truth, Sarah replied. I want my children to hear the truth, that I have cancer, that I'm fighting it, that I love them, and that every day I'm in treatment is a day I'm fighting to come home to them. The truth, Marcus said, his voice bitter, is that your children have been asking questions I didn't know how to answer. The truth is that David has been overwhelmed and exhausted trying to manage everything alone. The truth is that watching you get sicker and sicker has been terrifying, and maybe I tried to protect them from that terror by suggesting it wasn't as serious as it appeared. For the first time since the confrontation began, Sarah heard something genuine in Marcus's voice: fear, confusion, helplessness. But understanding his motivation didn't excuse the damage he caused. Marcus, I know this has been hard for everyone, but the way to protect children from scary truths isn't to replace them with hurtful lies. You taught my children to doubt my love for them. You taught them that my mother's illness was a choice, a weakness, an excuse. Do you understand how damaging that is? Emma looked up from the letters, her eyes bright with tears. I thought you didn't want to see us anymore. Sarah felt her own tears starting, the weight of months of separation and misunderstanding finally breaking through her careful control. Oh, sweetheart, I have wanted to see you every single day. I have missed you so much that sometimes it hurt worse than the cancer.
Uncle Marcus said you were too tired to want to play with us. I am tired sometimes because the medicine is very strong. But being tired doesn't mean I don't want to be with you. It just means I need to rest so I can get stronger. Jake had been quietly turning pages in his letter collection, but now he looked up at Marcus with the devastating honesty of a 6-year-old. Uncle Marcus, why did you tell us things that weren't true? Marcus looked at Jake, then at Emma, then at the adults who were watching him struggle to explain the inexplicable. How do you tell children that you lied to them about their mother's love because the truth was too complicated, too scary, too difficult to manage? I thought it would be easier for you if you weren't waiting for Mommy to come home all the time. I thought if you understood that she had chosen to be in the hospital, it would hurt less than thinking she was forced to be there. But it hurt more, Emma said simply. It hurt more to think she didn't want to be with us. The room fell silent except for the sound of the heating system cycling on and the distant noise of traffic outside. Sarah looked at her children, really looked at them, for the first time in months, without the filter of Marcus's interpretations, David's concerns, or medical necessity. Emma had grown taller, her face showing the emerging independence of a child learning to navigate complex emotions. Jake still had the soft roundness of early childhood,
but his eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before the cancer, before the divorce, before the lies that had taught him to question the reliability of love. "I'm sorry," Marcus said finally, the words falling into the quiet like stones into water. "I'm sorry I confused you. I'm sorry I made you doubt your mother's love. I was trying to help, but I made things worse." It was the first honest thing he'd said all evening, but Sarah knew that apologies didn't undo months of psychological damage, didn't immediately restore trust, didn't automatically heal the wounds that had been inflicted on her relationship with her children. "What happens now?" Emma asked, her 8-year-old practicality cutting through the adult emotional complexity. Sarah looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "Now Mommy finishes her treatment, gets stronger, and comes home. Now we spend time together so you can remember how much I love you. Now we tell the truth about everything, the scary parts, and the hopeful parts, and the parts we don't understand yet." "Can you come home tonight?" Jake asked. "Not tonight, baby. My immune system is still too weak and I need to be careful about germs. But I can visit more often, and we can talk on the phone every day, and I can write you letters until I'm strong enough to come home for good." Sarah studied her mother's face, her expressions serious and evaluative. "Uncle Marcus, you need to say sorry to Mommy too, not just to us." Marcus looked at Sarah, his face a mixture of shame and defensiveness. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I thought I was helping." "I know you thought that, but thinking you're helping doesn't excuse the damage you caused. You took my children's trust in their mother's love and broke it into pieces. That's going to take time to repair." "How do we repair it?" David asked. Sarah pulled both children closer to her chair, Emma leaning against one armrest, Jake climbing back onto her lap despite his growing size. "We start with truth," she said. "We start with honesty about the cancer, about the treatment, about how hard this has been for everyone. We start with the understanding that love doesn't disappear because someone gets sick, and that fighting for your life is not the same as abandoning your children."
She looked at Marcus, who was standing by the window now, his back to the room, his shoulders rigid with what might have been guilt or shame or stubborn defensiveness. "And Marcus, you don't get to be involved in decisions about my children anymore. You don't get to interpret my actions to them or explain my motivations or filter their communication with me. You've lost that privilege." Marcus turned back to the room, his face flushed with anger. "Sarah, I've been helping David with everything." "You've been helping yourself to the role of replacement parent by systematically undermining the actual parent," Sarah replied. "That ends now." David nodded slowly. "She's right, Marcus. I appreciate everything you've done, but you overstepped. You made decisions about Sarah's relationship with the kids that weren't yours to make." "So what am I supposed to do? Just disappear? Pretend I haven't been here for months while Sarah was fighting cancer," David finished firmly. "Yes, you were here. Yes, you helped. But you also caused tremendous damage, and that damage needs to be addressed before you can be around Emma and Jake again." The confrontation had lasted over an hour, and Sarah could feel her energy flagging, the familiar exhaustion that still followed any emotional or physical exertion. But for the first time in months, she felt like she was winning a battle that mattered. "I need to go soon," she said to Emma and Jake. "The medicine makes me tired and I need to rest. But I want you to know that I'm going to call you every day, and I'm going to visit as often as I can, and I'm going to keep fighting to get better so I can come home." "Promise?" Jake asked. "I promise," Sarah said, meaning it with every cell in her body that wasn't currently being attacked by chemotherapy. As she prepared to leave, Emma handed her back the folder of letters. "Can you write us more letters, even if we can see you now?" "I'll write you a letter every week. And you can write me letters too if you want. We'll keep telling each other how much we love each other until I'm strong enough to come home and show you every day." The drive back to Sarah's house was quiet, both she and David processing the evening's revelations. As they pulled into her driveway, David turned off the engine but made no move to leave.
I owe you an apology, too, he said finally. Yes, you do. I let Marcus convince me that you were exaggerating how sick you were. I wanted to believe it because it was easier than accepting that the mother of my children might actually die. Sarah nodded, too exhausted to be angry anymore. I understand why you wanted to believe it, but you let him poison our children's understanding of my love for them. That's going to take a long time to heal. I'll help, David said. I'll make sure they understand the truth. I'll make sure Marcus doesn't have access to them until he can acknowledge what he did wrong. Good, Sarah said, opening the car door. Because they need both their parents right now, not Marcus's version of who their parents are.
As she walked toward her front door, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just hope for her physical recovery, but hope that her relationship with Emma and Jake could be restored, that love could triumph over lies, that truth could heal the wounds that manipulation had inflicted. But she also knew that tonight was just the beginning. Marcus had had months to build his narrative, and she would need weeks, maybe months, to rebuild the trust he had systematically destroyed. The war for her children's understanding of her love was far from over. Inside her quiet house, Sarah looked at the documentation Patricia had helped her organize, at the evidence of love and struggle and daily fighting that had been hidden from her children for too long. Tomorrow she would call Dr. Martinez, the family counselor Patricia had recommended. Tomorrow she would begin the work of healing not just her body, but her family. Tonight, she wrote 2 more letters, one to Emma, one to Jake, telling them about the evening, about how proud she was of their questions and their honesty, about how much she looked forward to the day when letters would no longer be necessary because she would be home to tuck them into bed. And for the first time since her diagnosis, Sarah went to sleep believing that day would come. What happens when a mother's fight for her life becomes a fight for her children's love? This is the remarkable true story of Sarah Chen, a graphic designer whose battle with cancer became overshadowed by an even more devastating threat, the systematic manipulation of her children by someone she trusted most. Sarah's world began to crumble on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday. Recently divorced from David, she was already navigating the complex terrain of co-parenting their 2 children, 8-year-old Emma, wise beyond her years, and 6-year-old Jake, full of curiosity and boundless energy. The divorce had been amicable enough. They'd grown apart rather than grown better, choosing to prioritize their children's well-being over their own disappointments. Then came the diagnosis that changed everything: cancer. Not just any cancer, but an aggressive form that would require immediate, intensive treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, months of compromised immune system, and the very real possibility that she might not survive to see her children grow up. As a single mother facing the fight of her life, Sarah felt grateful when David's brother Marcus stepped forward to help. Marcus had always been the reliable one, successful, unmarried, devoted to his niece and nephew. When he offered to provide additional support during Sarah's treatment, it seemed like a blessing. David was already stretched thin managing work and sudden full-time parenting duties. Marcus's help felt like exactly what their fractured family needed. What Sarah didn't realize was that Marcus had his own vision of what their family should look like, and it didn't include her. Marcus's campaign against Sarah began subtly, wrapped in the language of love and concern. It started during Sarah's first rounds of chemotherapy, when she was too weak to spend extended time with Emma and Jake, when her immune system required careful isolation, when the children had to witness their mother's physical transformation. Your mommy is very sick, but don't worry, Uncle Marcus is here to take care of you. On the surface, this seemed supportive. Underneath, it was the beginning of a systematic effort to replace Sarah's role in her children's lives. Marcus began to position himself not as temporary help during a medical crisis, but as the stable, reliable parent figure the children truly needed. That maybe mommy's priorities weren't what they should be.
When Sarah fell asleep during a movie night, exhausted from treatment, Marcus wondered aloud whether Mommy really wanted to spend time with them or if she was just pretending. "I think your mommy is sicker than she's telling us," Marcus would whisper conspiratorially to the children. "I think she might be too sick to take care of you anymore. But that's okay. Uncle Marcus will always be here." David, overwhelmed by his own fears about Sarah's prognosis and desperate for help managing the children, initially welcomed Marcus's increased involvement. When Marcus suggested that maybe it would be better for Emma and Jake to have less contact with their mother during treatment to protect them from the trauma of seeing her so ill, David found himself nodding along. As Sarah's treatment progressed, the isolation became more complete. Marcus convinced David that shorter, less frequent visits would be better for everyone. He argued that the children were becoming anxious about their mother's appearance, that they needed stability rather than the emotional roller coaster of watching someone they loved fight for her life. What Marcus was actually doing was severing the connection between Sarah and her children at the moment when that connection was most crucial. Emma and Jake, already confused and frightened by their mother's illness, began to internalize Marcus's messages about Sarah's priorities and commitment to them. "If Mommy really wanted to see us, she would make more effort," Marcus would suggest. "If she really missed us, she wouldn't be too tired for phone calls." The children, desperate for stability and reassurance, began to turn more fully toward Marcus as their emotional anchor. He was always available, always energetic, always ready with activities and attention. In contrast, their mother seemed increasingly distant, weak, and unavailable. Sarah, fighting for her life in chemotherapy chairs and hospital beds, began to notice the change in her children's behavior. Emma's hugs became perfunctory. Jake seemed uncomfortable during their brief visits. Phone calls grew shorter and less frequent, with the children seeming eager to return to whatever activity Uncle Marcus had planned. When Sarah tried to discuss her concerns with David, he dismissed them as the natural result of her illness. "The kids are just scared. Marcus is helping them cope. You need to focus on getting better." But Sarah could feel something deeper shifting. Her children's love, once automatic and unconditional, was beginning to feel conditional indeed, conditioned on her health, her energy, her ability to compete with Marcus's constant availability. The truth might have remained hidden indefinitely if not for Patricia, Sarah's oncology nurse, who had developed a genuine fondness for her patient. During one of Sarah's treatment sessions, Emma and Jake came for a brief visit, accompanied by Marcus. Patricia watched in growing alarm as Marcus subtly undermined every interaction between Sarah and her children. When Sarah asked about Emma's school project, Marcus jumped in to explain that Emma had already told him all about it, implying that Sarah was late to the conversation. When Jake showed his mother a drawing, Marcus commented that Jake had drawn a much better picture for Uncle Marcus the day before. Most disturbing of all, Patricia overheard Marcus telling the children in the hallway that their mother was too sick to really understand what you're going through, and that they should save their real feelings for people who were strong enough to handle them. Patricia, who had worked with countless families navigating cancer treatment, recognized emotional manipulation when she saw it. That evening, she called Sarah. "I need to tell you something," Patricia said. "What I witnessed today isn't normal family support during a medical crisis. What Marcus is doing to your relationship with Emma and Jake, that's psychological abuse."
The words hit Sarah like a second diagnosis. She had been so focused on fighting cancer that she hadn't fully recognized the signs of someone systematically dismantling her family from within. Armed with Patricia's professional perspective and her own growing awareness, Sarah began to document what was happening. She requested that all visits with her children be direct, without Marcus as an intermediary. She asked David to record the children's actual words about their feelings rather than Marcus's interpretations of those feelings. What she discovered was heartbreaking. Emma and Jake still loved their mother desperately, but they had been taught to doubt that love, to question their own feelings, to believe that their mother's illness was somehow a choice or a reflection of her priorities. Uncle Marcus says you're too sick to be a good mommy anymore, Emma finally confessed during one painful conversation. He says it's not your fault, but maybe Jake and I need a new family that's not broken. Sarah realized that Marcus hadn't just been helping with childcare. He had been conducting a psychological campaign to convince her children that she was no longer capable of being their mother, that they needed to transfer their primary attachment to him. The confrontation with Marcus was devastating. When Sarah finally challenged him directly, he didn't deny his actions, he defended them. "Someone has to think about what's best for Emma and Jake," he said. "You're dying, Sarah. Even if you survive the cancer, you'll never be the same. These children need stability, not a mother who might relapse at any time." "These children need their mother," Sarah replied, "not your version of what they need." "Look at yourself," Marcus continued cruelly. "You're bald, you're weak, you throw up constantly. Is that really the image you want them to remember? Is that really the mother they need?" But Sarah had learned something crucial during her months of cancer treatment. Fighting for your life teaches you exactly how much fight you actually have in you. What followed was the most difficult period of Sarah's life, more challenging even than chemotherapy. She had to simultaneously continue her medical treatment while rebuilding trust with children who had been systematically taught to doubt her love and commitment. The process required professional help. Dr. Martinez, a family therapist specializing in medical trauma, became Sarah's ally in reconstructing the truth of their family story. "Your children haven't stopped loving you," Dr. Martinez explained, "but they've been given a false narrative about what your love means and how much you can be trusted to provide it. We need to help them rediscover their own feelings rather than the feelings Marcus told them they should have." The therapy sessions were painful, but revelatory. Emma and Jake were given permission to express their genuine fears about their mother's illness, their anger about the disruption to their family, their confusion about conflicting messages from the adults in their lives. Slowly, carefully, the truth began to emerge. The children described feeling yucky when Marcus said certain things about their mother, even though his words were supposed to make them feel better. They talked about missing their mother even when Marcus assured them they were better off without her constant presence. "I wanted to tell Mommy about my bad dream," Jake admitted during one session, but Uncle Marcus said she was too sick to worry about kid problems. But then I felt sad that I couldn't tell her. Emma, always more articulate than her younger brother, found words for the complex manipulation she had experienced. "Uncle Marcus made me think that loving Mommy was the wrong thing to do. He made me think that I was supposed to stop missing her."
Recovery, both from cancer and from Marcus's betrayal, took time. Sarah's medical treatment progressed successfully. Her immune system strengthened, her energy returned. But the emotional healing required different kinds of medicine: truth, patience, and the gradual rebuilding of trust. David, finally understanding the full extent of his brother's manipulation, became Sarah's ally rather than her obstacle. He had been manipulated too, convinced that reducing the children's contact with their mother was protective rather than harmful. "I thought I was helping," David said during one of their co-parenting conversations. "I thought Marcus was right that the kids needed to be shielded from the worst parts of your illness. I didn't realize he was shielding them from you entirely." The children's recovery was remarkably resilient. Once given permission to trust their own feelings again, Emma and Jake reconnected with their mother with an intensity that was both heartbreaking and healing. They had missed her more than Marcus's manipulation had allowed them to express. Emma began asking detailed questions about cancer treatment, wanting to understand what her mother had been going through rather than being protected from that reality. Jake started insisting on longer phone calls, as if making up for lost conversations. Most importantly, both children learned to recognize the difference between support that strengthened family bonds and manipulation that weakened them. 3 years later, Sarah's family looks different than it did before cancer, but it's stronger in ways that matter most. Sarah and David remain divorced, but have become effective co-parents, united in their commitment to honesty and their children's well-being. Marcus is no longer part of their lives. Despite completing therapy and writing letters of apology, he never fully acknowledged the psychological damage he had caused. Emma and Jake, now 11 and 9, made their own decisions about whether to rebuild a relationship with their uncle. Both chose not to, demonstrating the healthy boundary setting they had learned through their experience. Sarah's cancer remains in remission. Her 4-year anniversary approaches, a milestone that marks not just medical survival, but the complete reconstruction of her family's emotional foundation. The children have thrived. Emma, now in middle school, shows remarkable emotional intelligence and an ability to recognize manipulation when she encounters it. Jake has developed into a confident child who trusts his own feelings and isn't afraid to express them. Sarah has transformed her experience into professional purpose, working as a consultant and illustrator for resources that help families navigate serious illness while maintaining healthy relationships and honest communication.
The children learned perhaps the most valuable lesson of all, that their own emotional responses were valid and trustworthy, that love could survive even the most devastating attempts to destroy it, and that truth, even painful truth, felt safer than comfortable lies. What makes this story ultimately hopeful is not that everyone lived happily ever after, but that love proved stronger than manipulation, that children's instincts proved more reliable than adult manipulation, and that family bonds, when based on truth rather than fantasy, could survive almost anything. Sarah's cancer was a crisis that brought out both the worst and the best in the people around her. Marcus's response revealed the dangers of believing that loving someone means controlling their relationships. David's eventual recognition of the truth showed the possibility of growth and redemption. The children's resilience demonstrated the power of honest communication and trusted bonds. In the end, Sarah didn't just survive cancer, she reclaimed her family from someone who had tried to steal it under the guise of saving it. This powerful story of family resilience, medical trauma, and the triumph of truth over manipulation offers hope to anyone facing seemingly impossible odds. If you found Sarah's journey compelling, please subscribe to hear more stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges with courage, wisdom, and love. Subscribe now to never miss these inspiring tales of human resilience and the unbreakable bonds that sustain us through life's greatest trials.